All right, so let's begin. So I'm very happy to welcome Saravana Ravindran, who's currently faculty at the National University of Singapore, who's going to give us a talk about intergenerational impacts from the world's largest early childhood program. So you can, of course, interrupt anytime during the talk, unmute yourselves and ask a question, or if you can't talk, you can always drop your question into the chat and I will take it up with the speaker. All right. So with that, Saravana, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. So I'm Saravana. I'm at the Public Policy School at the National University of Singapore, and this is joint work with Manisha Shah at UCLA. So today I want to present this work on the intergenerational impacts from the world's largest early childhood program. So a large body of work from around the world really highlights the impacts of early childhood programs for individuals who are exposed to these programs. However, I would argue that much less is known about the spillovers of such programs on the next generation. And I think there's a unique opportunity to study these intergenerational impacts as individuals who are exposed to historical early childhood programs grow up and have children whose outcomes we can now observe. And this is especially policy relevant for developing countries. So the problems of poverty traps and persistence of poor health across generations are particularly salient in developing countries. And as these countries weigh different poverty alleviation programs to understand their cost effectiveness, understanding the rates of return to these programs that also take into account the intergenerational impacts may have important implications for how countries choose to spend scarce resources. So in the paper, we're going to ask the following key question: what are the intergenerational impacts of early childhood programs on the health of the next generation? To give you a quick preview of what we are going to do, we use the rollout of the world's largest early childhood program, the Integrated Child Development Services, or ICDS, in India from 1975 to 2016. We're going to be exploiting differences across all districts in India in the number of ICDS centers constructed, along with differences across cohorts induced by timing of program arrival in these districts. So that's going to be a difference in differences approach. What makes this possible is historical administrative data that we collected and merged with household survey data for the analysis. Okay, to give you a quick preview of what we find, I'm going to show you today positive health impacts for the children of mothers who are exposed to the ICDS. In particular, I'll show you evidence of lower mortality, stunting, underweight, as well as low birth weight among these children. And overall, we do not find significant intergenerational impacts from fathers' program exposure. We find that mothers who were exposed to the ICDS invested more in their children, so they were more likely to take iron tablets when pregnant, vaccinate their children, and also provide them with a nutritious diet. Understanding the mechanisms is important, and we conduct a mediation analysis, which reveals that maternal education and household wealth seem to be key factors that drive these impacts we find. At the end, I'll show you a cost-benefit analysis, and we find that accounting for the intergenerational impacts increases the internal rate of return to the program by about 35%. So we contribute to a large body of work on the impacts of early childhood interventions. So there's been a lot of theoretical as well as empirical work on early childhood interventions around the world. There's been work on the ICDS in particular, and I had the opportunity to present the first generation impacts of the ICDS at ISI several years ago. And there's been work that studies the first generation impacts of the ICDS. Now, where we think we contribute most to the literature is really in the intergenerational impacts of such an early childhood intervention. So this is a sort of relatively new area in the literature, and there are a handful of papers that are starting to emerge. So in the US, there are 2-3 papers on the Head Start as well as the preschool programs. And there's an evaluation of a preschool program in Denmark. Really, there aren't studies from sort of developing country settings, and in particular also studies that really focus on the health outcomes of the second generation beneficiaries. So I think these are areas where we contribute most to the literature. Okay, so
sorry to interrupt, Saravana.
Yes.
I was just wondering what is the IRR without taking into account intergenerational effects? Like how much accounting for these things change the IRR?
Yes, I'll show you the numbers later. The IRR in the first generation is about 9%. That of course varies depending on the specific assumptions we put on the calculation, and that increases to about 12% once we value the intergenerational impacts. So I'll contextualize the magnitudes in a bit, and also compare that with some other estimates from the literature. Are there any other questions at this point? Great. Okay. So I'll push on then. So the sort of a roadmap is going to be as follows. I'm going to start by telling you more about the program, and in particular how it was rolled out over time and across India. I'll describe the data sets that we use, and the differences empirical strategy that we use in the paper. Taking that strategy to the data, I'll show you the intergenerational impacts that we estimate. I'll show you the mediation analysis that we conduct, and conclude by putting all of this together in a cost-benefit analysis framework. Okay, so I think many of you may already know about the program. So the ICDS was launched in 1975 to provide free primary healthcare services and preschool education to children under 6 years of age. So this is integrated because it has these broad components of health and education. So some examples of the health services include prenatal care for mothers, immunizations, health checkups, supplementary nutrition, referral services, as well as health information. And the education is really preschool education for children aged 3 to 6. So, I want to stress that this is the world's largest early childhood program. By 2010, the program reached about 40 million children every year, and the government spends a lot of money on the program. So the 2020-21 ICDS budget was about $3 billion US dollars. Next, I want to describe how the program was rolled out over time. So this graph focuses on the temporal variation, and what we plot here is the number of ICDS centers per 1,000 children. And this is going to be our main measure of program intensity. So we see that there's a steady expansion, not just in the number of ICDS centers that are constructed, and there are close to 1 million of these centers all across India by the end of 2016, but there's also a steady expansion for the most part in the number of ICDS centers per 1,000 children, thereby keeping up with population growth. Next, to give you a sense of how the expansion took place over India, I want to present a series of heat maps and that plot the program intensity in sort of 4 10-year intervals. So this is a district map of India that shows the number of ICDS centers per 1,000 children in 1985, so 10 years after program inception. And then I'll just quickly roll forward. So this is 20 years after the program started, 30 years after, and this is 40 years after in 2015. Okay, so immediately you would have noticed several things. One, the significant heterogeneity in the intensity and also timing of program arrival in Indian districts. Second, there's also significant heterogeneity across states. So several states, even by 2015, had a relatively low level of program exposure, and by that program intensity, and by that I mean the number of ICDS centers per 1,000 children. And we want to take this into account in our empirical strategy. So everything will be sort of a within state, but comparing across districts comparison. So what then determines program placement? Okay, so on paper, the main metric that was used to determine the number of centers that are to be built in a district is that of population. So there were explicit population guidelines for how many centers there should be in a given area. For the part of time period that we consider, this rule was that there should be a center for about every 1,500 people. This number has been revised more recently, and today it's one for every 800. But for the most part, it's been one for every 1,500. And looking at the data, this actually seems to play out. So when we look at correlates of program placement, and we look across, so this table spills over two slides. So we look across a host of population, but also educational infrastructure, health infrastructure, and other road connectivity and such. What seems to stand out really is that population drives a lot of the program placement, and that number actually is not too far off from 1 in 1,500 in the first row. So by and large, it seems that this was the sort of defining variable for how centers were being built. We do note that there seems to be some correlation with villages that already had a health subcenter were more likely to also have ICDS centers. And we want to, of course, address the possibility that we're picking up the effect of some other program and not the ICDS. And so for that, I'll show you placebo tests that basically exploit the age eligibility criterion of the program. So this is an early childhood program for children 6 and below, and so we should be picking up impacts only within that age range. And so I'll get to that in a bit. But this also aligns with some of the literature that I highlighted earlier. Lokshin and co-authors, for example, who find that in the construction of these centers, that really doesn't seem to have been systematic placement of these centers other than the sort of population guidelines that were in place for construction. And this is, of course, within states, looking at variation across districts. So we have the state by year fixed effects here. Okay, so I hope that gives an idea of what the program is, how it was rolled out over time, but also across space, and what were the correlates of the program placement.
Saravana, so in these regressions, how many years of data do you have?
So this is using the first 2 rounds of the NFHS data.
So 92, 93, and 99.
That's right.
98, 99. So why do you have 450 observations? Shouldn't you have a lot more than that? If you had 2 rounds of NFHS at the district level, right?
Yes, I can go back and check the data. I wonder if it's because we wanted all the correlates as well. but that's something that we can certainly double check. And we've done this. I remember we did this separately by round as well, and we saw very similar patterns come up.
Is it that NFHS didn't cover all the districts? Just selected some, or is that why? Because are you getting only NFHS?
Yeah, I can double check so this is from the what is it, the village infrastructure, the village surveys that were done in the NFHS in those years, and so I should double check if we have complete data for all the districts, or if there's districts that were not covered. One thing that we could do is also use other data sets. So I can also cross-check whether I've been working with, say, ICDS data, NSS data, and so I can.
For this, couldn't you just use the census? These seem to be all census variables. Yeah, because it's all district level stuff, right?
Yeah, I can certainly do a census check as well.
In which case you should get many more districts.
Many more, yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, so the data that we use is, so the main data really is this administrative data on the ICDS that we worked with the Ministry of Women and Child Development to collect. So this spans 1975 to 2016, so from program inception all the way to 2016. And what the data set offers is the location and date of opening for the universe of ICDS centers. So we know which district the center is located in and the year in which it was opened. So this, we believe, offers several advantages over trying to infer the sort of ICDS intensity or rollout from the household surveys, which, so for example, I've tried doing a similar exercise with the IHDS data set. So they ask, could you tell us how many years ago did this ICDS center near you open? And you see very clear bunching at say 5, 10, 15 year intervals. And so that level of data is hard to work with, especially when you want to exploit a tight age window over which the children are eligible for the program. And so we believe that this offers that advantage that we know from this administrative data exactly where and when these centers were open for all these centers in this time period. And so we merged that with the 3 rounds of the NFHS, rounds 1, 2, and 4. Again, I want to note that while the NFHS has several advantages, the data lacks information on the program take-up, and so what we'll need data on is program take-up by the parents. So it's almost impossible to know, when we see a child in the data set, whether the parent actually went to one of these centers when they were young to take up the services. So that level of utilization data we do not have. And so everything that I'll show you today is going to be intent to treat ITT analysis. Okay, so just to give you some summary statistics of the key variables that we use in the study. So we organize these across 3 broad categories of child mortality, anthropometrics, and parental investments. So on the child mortality, we focus on infant mortality and under 5 mortality, so death before ages 1 and 5. And you know, in these data sets, you see a rather high level of 7 to 8% of children die before these ages. On child anthropometrics, the sort of mean birth weight is about 2.8 kilograms. The recommended is above 2.5. Below that, you're considered to have a low birth weight. And we also focus on this metric of extremely low birth weight. So birth weight below 1 kilogram, which is the prevalence of that, at least in India, is not extremely large, but following the literature, we also look at this as an outcome. Then we have the three standard variables of stunting, underweight, and wasting. So children having a very low height for their age, weight for age, and weight for height. And there we see that 23 to about 41% of children are wasted, underweight, or stunted. Then we have a set of variables that relate to the parental investments. So the NFHS has data on whether the mother takes iron tablets when pregnant, vaccinates their children, feeds their child with a nutritious diet, and also breastfeeds the child. And here you see that the rates of parents doing this is relatively high, so above 70%. And for breastfeeding, it's close to 90%. So I think that's one of the reasons we don't detect significant impacts, and I'll show you that in a bit. Okay.
Just one quick question. Why is there such a big difference in the number of observations for the mortality?
That's a great question. So the mortality data is for the mothers. The NFHS actually records the entire birth history for all children born to the mother. But when the data on child anthropometrics and such are asked, it's not asked for all the children in the household. So that's why there's that discrepancy. So for mortality, we actually have the entire birth history, and so then we can look at deaths in that data.
But that still seems to be too large a multiple. I mean, the fertility rates weren't 6, right?
That's true. Yeah, the fertility rates were lower, but I can certainly double check how the mortality data corresponds with the other data sets. Yeah, I can certainly check that, but that's the main reason why there's that difference. It's the using the birth history data versus the children who actually asked about in the other sections of the NFHS.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you have the ratio is about twice what it should be if that was the explanation. So there's something else going on as well.
Yeah, I can certainly check that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Great. Okay, so the empirical strategy is going to be a difference in different strategy, and so the main idea is that we want to compare children who are otherwise identical, but some of whose mothers were exposed to greater program intensity. So that's the identification that we want to use here. And so for a child I, aged A in district subdivision J, state S, for the child born in year K, whose mother was born in year M, we run the following regression. So we have our outcome variable of interest. So that's the mortality or anthropometrics, parental investments outcome that I had showed you earlier. We're going to have district subdivision fixed effects. And by district subdivision, I just mean the division between the rural and urban parts of the district. So that's the lowest level at which these data sets are identified, and we merge the data at that level. We have child year of birth by state fixed effects. So comparing children who are born in the same year and state, but in different district subdivisions, and likewise mother year of birth by state fixed effects. Now, we note that the program continues to roll out over time. And so when we look at these children, the children continue to be exposed to the ICDS. And so what we want to do to be able to isolate the impact of the mother's program exposure is also control for the level of program exposure that the children are receiving at the time they are being observed, right? So we include the average number of centers per 1,000 children in the district subdivision over the eligible years in which these children are able to go and take up the program. And the key thing is then controlling for all of this. Beta 2 then is our main coefficient of interest, where we are interested in the impact of an increase in mother's program intensity on the outcome variables of interest, controlling for anything that the children receive, controlling for these fixed effects.
So I don't understand why you have a measure of program intensity for the children. Because of the children, you observe whether they're actually exposed to the program or not, don't you?
So the NFHS has some data on the utilization. It's not great, but since we have the administrative data, we just control for the program intensity that the children may be eligible to, sort of keeping with that ITT framework, control for the number of centers per 1,000 children in the district over the years in which the children are eligible. So maybe that number, since exposed in that district over time, and so the children are eligible and can take advantage of that, we just control for that level that the children are being exposed to. That's it.
I'm not sure that's what one wants. Your coefficient of interest is beta 2, right?
Yes. So what we want to try to isolate is the impact of the mother's program exposure on the child's outcomes of interest, or these parental investment variables. So we want to basically hold everything else constant. The other, basically compare children who are otherwise identical, but some of whose mothers had more program exposure.
So what you're not picking up here is the possibility that if the mother was in a district which had the ICDS at the time she was of an eligible age, then it's more likely that her children will take advantage of ICDS. That's not being controlled for. All that is being controlled for is that the possibility of taking advantage in terms of the aggregate measure in the district.
Oh, I see.
Is higher.
Oh, I see. So you suggest controlling for the actual sort of take up of the program. The NFHS has some data on this, and we can see if we can work with that. But
for example, is there any way from this to rule out that if the mother was nearer to an ICDS center, that makes it more likely that her child will be nearer to an ICDS center, and then that's what's explaining this?
So we don't have the distance.
But if you actually control for whether the child went to the ICDS center, then you rule that out as a mechanism.
Right. I see.
Because you don't have within district information, do you? You don't know how far the mother was from the ICDS center. You don't know how far the mother is from the ICDS center at the time she has the child, and so on.
Yeah. So that data we don't have.
So one can see that that's a possibility, right? It's true that the mothers typically will not be in the same location when she's a child and when she has a child, but it could be that those two, the fact that you're near an ICDS center, could be correlated. It could be due to village characteristics and things like that, and
Sure,
marriage characteristics.
Sure. Yes. That's true. We can take a look at what's in the NFHS. Of course, that's more like a snapshot of, we won't know since the child was born, or even when the child was in utero, what the history of utilization has been. But at least as a snapshot of at the time of the survey, have they been going to these centers? I think there's some data in the NFHS that we can use as a control.
Yeah, I think that would be more reassuring that you're not picking up something to do with locations and matching and marriage and so on.
Right. Yeah. So of course there's all the first generation impacts, of course, on many dimensions. And so, for example, marriage, there's work showing that they may be marrying better educated spouses. They themselves are more educated. They are doing better in the labor market and such. And so all of that does pass down to the children, and that I think we want to allow for. I think that we think of as sort of mechanism. But I think what you're saying is the sort of correlation with the current ICDS program intensity and their likelihood of taking up the services.
Yeah, I'm concerned that it's not actually a channel, that rather, it would be okay if what you are leaving out is a mechanism through which this is working, because then you do want to pick it up.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also possible that it's not at all ICDS related. It's just to do with spatial characteristics.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. We can take a look at the data and see what we can include additionally to address that. That's helpful. Yeah. Thank you for the suggestion there. And
Saravana, there's a question in the chat. I just want to about this measuring the mother's program intensity.
yes.
Does it assume that mothers grew up in the same district subdivision as they were married into?
So yes, that's a great question, and I'll talk about migration in a few slides. So unfortunately, we don't observe that. So what we have to assume in sort of merging the data is we assign the ICDS sort of program intensity in the district at which the person is currently located, and that's all we see in the data. We don't have that migration history in the data. What we'll do to address sort of potential selective migration is to try to put some bounds on these numbers to see sort of if we are to take into account sort of migration rates, by how much can we knock down the estimates, and does that completely change the picture or not. So I'll show that in a few slides, but that's one of the limitations of the NFHS data. We don't have the migration history. In particular, we don't know the location of birth for these individuals.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah. Great questions. We have a host of controls that are at the child level, so gender by birth order, fixed effects, age, some household level controls, religion, caste, mother's age, for example, and the quadratic population polynomial, because that's what was determining program placement in these areas. We're also interested in understanding whether father's program exposure has an impact on the outcomes of interest. And so to study that, we simply augment the specification I just showed you with the father year of birth by state fixed effects, the father's program intensity as similarly defined, and augment the set of controls with, say, the father's age. And here then we're interested in the coefficient beta 3, and I'll show you what we estimate. Okay. Any other questions so far? All good? Okay. So the next, what I want to do is present the intergenerational impacts that we estimate, taking this specification to the data. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to present a couple of plots that look like this. So on the x-axis here, we have the impacts in standard deviation units. On the y-axis, we have these variables grouped in the 3 families of mortality, anthropometrics, and parental investments. And these are sort of the sign has been flipped so that estimates to the right, or estimates that are positive, suggest improvements in these outcomes. What we are interested in are these red circles, which show you the estimate of beta 2 that we were interested in, along with 95% confidence intervals. Okay. So what we see immediately is that overall there seem to be positive intergenerational impacts from the mother's program exposure. So for example, children born to mothers with higher program intensity were less likely to die before ages 1 and 5. They were less likely to be of extremely low birth weight or be stunted or underweight. And then mothers who were exposed to greater program intensity when they were young were more likely to take iron tablets when pregnant, vaccinate their children, and feed their child with okay. Next, this figure presents the estimates from the second equation that I set up earlier, where we are interested additionally in the father's program exposure. And that we plot in these green diamonds, and what you see immediately is that by and large these program impacts for the fathers are very close to 0 and almost always not statistically significant. The only exception seems to be that whether the child is being fed nutritious diet, but otherwise these are not statistically different from 0. The other thing to note is that
Saravana, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
So I'm trying to understand this. What does it mean for child's exposure iron tablets when pregnant? Is that how is that different from mother's exposure? I can't quite understand.
Oh yes. I just noticed a typo there. Yeah. So what this is plotting is the likelihood that a mother took iron tablets when she was pregnant, if the mother herself was exposed to an additional ICDS center per 1,000 children when she was young and eligible for the program. So that's what that estimate is plotting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Just one more question on this. How are we to interpret the magnitudes of these various things? How have you sort of, you must have scaled them in some way?
Yes. If you can give me 2 slides, I have a slide on the magnitude. So if I can hold off and then we can revisit the discussion on magnitudes in a minute. I think what I wanted to also note from the sort of the father program exposure figure is that additionally including the father's program exposure does not dramatically change the results that we saw for the mother's program exposure. So that's, I think, the other thing to note from this figure. In the paper, what we also do is we to address multiple hypothesis testing, we construct indices for each of these 3 families of outcomes, and we just rerun the estimation on those indices. And what we find is that for each of the 3 indices for the mother's program exposure, those are positive, and statistically significant. And then for the fathers, all three of them are not different from 0. Okay. So yes, on the magnitude. So what I showed earlier was the impacts of being exposed to an additional center per 1,000 children when they were young. So it's a little hard to interpret. One way of thinking about it is, say, if you're interested in comparing areas that didn't have the program versus areas with the average level of program intensity. What if a mother was exposed to the average level of program intensity versus not being exposed to the program? We can scale that, and overall we find impacts on the range of about 0.024 to 0.056 standard deviation units. So, we can then ask, okay, are these large or small?
Standard deviations in the dependent variable.
Yes, these are standard deviations of the dependent variable. That's right. Yeah. And we can ask how do these compare with, say, other estimates in the literature? So they are notably smaller than, say, this very recent paper that came out on the intergenerational impacts of the midday meal feeding program in India. So there, Chakrabarti and co-authors estimate that the height for age z-scores increased by about 0.4 standard deviations, also in an intent to treat sense, among the children born to mothers with a full midday meal exposure relative to children born to non-exposed mothers. If we also compare the estimates, so Barr and Gibbs, for example, for the US, when they look at the Head Start estimates that range from about 0.2 to 0.3 standard deviation units. So that's what they see. So when we compare that with some of the other estimates, these are smaller. Of course, the ICDS is quite different from the midday meal program. It targets a very different age range. So primary school versus the early childhood ages. The other thing to note, of course, is that there's the utilization angle, right, which we unfortunately don't see. So the take-up data is not available for, we don't know for the parents whether they went and took up these services. Overall, there's been work that shows that utilization rates for the ICDS is low. So in 2006, for example, it ranged from about 3 to 10%, and there may be reasons to believe that the utilization may have been similar or even smaller as we go back in time. So, unfortunately, there isn't good data on the kind of take up, especially by these parents. But I think that's another reason why we could be seeing these differences in the overall ITT impacts that we estimate. Okay. So then next, what I want to turn to these placebo tests that I mentioned that exploit the age eligibility criterion of the program. And so, you might have concerns that there may be some systematic placement of centers in areas that are, say, getting better or worse over time, or some other confounding programs like health subcenters. And so the worry may be that we are picking up something else and not the effect of the ICDS. And so what we do is to use this age eligibility criterion, and really the exercise that we do is the following. So we control for the level of program intensity in the individual's and mother's year of birth. Controlling for that, we are interested in seeing whether leads and lags of year-on-year changes in the program intensity that the mother was exposed to has an impact on the outcomes of interest. And the idea is that individuals are only eligible for the program, so from age -1 because of the in utero period, up to and inclusive of age 6. So -1 to 6 is typically the age at which individuals can go to these centers and avail the services. And so the idea is that while sometimes there may be some children who are age 7 or 8 who go to the centers and try to take up services, by and large, this should not be happening especially once they are of primary school going age. So that's the basic idea behind the placebo test. And so if you think that there's some other program that whose impact we're picking up, this should hopefully convince you that there's something specific about the age range, and so that can't possibly explain why we are seeing the patterns we see if it's some other program. And likewise with the systematic placement of centers, it should just be sort of a general trend rather than something age specific. So this is what the placebo test looks like for the child health index. I'll just show these for the 3 indices that we constructed. So on the x-axis, we have the years that are relative to the mother's year of birth. And we have these leads and lags of the program exposure, and I'm plotting the estimates as set up in the previous equation. And so what you see is that by and large, there's not much happening before, sort of way before the mother is born. And then at age -1, you see a jump in the intergenerational impacts that then slowly fades out to age 6. And that decline is in line with the dosage of program exposure. So the reason is if there are sort of additional centers being built when the mother is age -1, she can take advantage of those centers for the remaining 6 years. Whereas if the additional centers being built when she's age 5, she can only take advantage of that when she's ages 5 and 6. So that's why that sort of dosage and decline. And we can repeat this for the mortality and the parental investments index. So unfortunately, it's some of them are not as sharp and clean. There is some noise, especially when we open it up by the age. But I think you get the idea that that there is this age eligibility criterion of the program, and we are seeing the impacts in line with that age eligibility for the ICDS.
Saravana, I had a quick question. So what you said for the center opening at like 1 year before mom's birth also holds for the center opening 2 years before mom's birth. But we see a sharp change, change between the two estimates. So what is the explanation? What would be the explanation for that?
Right. So this is why the setup is different from maybe your classic event study sort of setup, where you're right. Centers that are built way in the past will all contribute to, when the mother is born, she can take advantage of all of that program intensity if centers have been continuously being built in the past. And so that is the reason why we control for the level of program intensity when the mother is born. Controlling for that, we are looking at the sort of differential impacts of year-on-year changes in the program intensity relative to when the mother was born. So we are looking at these coefficients beta y on the differential changes in program intensity. But this is controlling for whatever program intensity there is when the mother is born. So that's why the setup is a bit different from, because you're exactly right, all the centers built in the years prior to when the mother is born, she can take advantage of that. And so if you do the kind of classic event study style thing, everything before 0 should be positive. So that's why we set it up slightly differently. Okay.
So if you set it up in levels, if you were to set it up in levels, then you should see nothing after age 6.
That is true. Yes. Yeah.
Perhaps you should do that
That's
also, because there seems to be
sure.
something in your, it's not very clean after age 6 in your diagrams.
Sure, we can run that as well in levels. Yeah. Yes, thank you for that suggestion. Yeah, that we can certainly do. Great. Okay. So now we come to the discussion of migration. Okay. So yes, as was pointed out, there is a concern that with the NFHS, we don't have data on the migration history, and in particular, we don't know exactly where these individuals are born. Right? We only observe their current residence, and so the best we can do is to assign the exposure based on the current location of residence and not the place of birth. We would have loved to have that data. And the worry is that maybe migration patterns are systematically correlated with ICDS program exposure. And you know what we do is sort of a bounding exercise where the goal is to really try to bound the difference in outcomes between the treatment and control groups, accounting for whatever the rate of migration there may be. So what we do is to turn to the 2011 census, and there we find that about 20% of women report being born in a district that was different from their place of enumeration. So that gives a sense of the migration rates for women, and the women's rates of migration are higher than that for men, particularly due to marriage. And the census data also, the 2011 census also is sort of represents an upper bound, because these migration rates have been increasing over time. So we did look at the census, and that was lower than 20%. So we think of, okay, 20% as being some sort of upper bound of the rate of migration that may have taken place in this time period. And then what we do is to say, okay, what if for 20% of the mothers whose program intensity was 0 and the child outcome was bad, instead we switched the child to have a good outcome. So we basically artificially try to lower the gap between the treatment and control groups. And you can do the same exercise, the kind of the flip of this as well. So for mothers who had exposure to the program, you can try to turn their child's outcomes to be bad instead of good, and it's pretty similar. But basically trying to put some bounds on the impacts. And you know, this table just pulls the variables that were statistically significant in the earlier figures. And we see that, I think, for all but one, the child being fed a nutritious diet, these remain statistically significant. The magnitudes do change though. So in the last row in each of the panels, we report the change in the coefficient, and the coefficients are smaller, and of course that is mechanical because we are bounding the estimates. And they in say infant mortality and the birth weight regressions, they fall by up to about 40%. But we believe that these magnitudes are still economically meaningful and significant, even if, you know, artificially we assume that all of the migration that could have taken place is in the direction that really lowers the impacts that we are finding. So hopefully that gives a sense of, if all of the migration was in a systematic way to bias our results, if we try to put a bound on that, by how much does our DOR estimates change? And we find that overall they are still statistically significant, and they are meaningful impacts.
So you don't have any direct information in the NFHS about the mother's birthplace, is it?
Unfortunately, we don't. Yeah, I think, yeah, we would have loved to have data on that, but the NFHS doesn't.
That question is just not asked?
It's not asked, yeah.
So nothing about the mother's natal home is asked?
No, not in the NFHS. No.
I see. That's quite surprising.
Yeah, we would have loved to have the mother's place of birth, because then we can just assign the program intensity with knowing that, okay, we are correctly assigning it. Here we are inferring it using the current location of residence, but we do know up to 20% of women do migrate from the time they are born. Mm-hmm.
So I just, sorry.
Yeah, just to continue, there's another way you could do this, right? You could check. I mean, it's very likely that if the mother did migrate, they migrated from an adjacent district. So that would probably pick up a substantial fraction of the migration. And in fact, from the census data, you could even validate that assumption, right? You could see how many are migrating from adjacent districts. And then you could use the program intensity in the neighboring districts.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, we can do that. That's a good idea. Yep. Thank you. That's a great idea. That's a check that we can do. Sorry, I think was there another question?
So I was just thinking whether you could do something in the IHDS data with the question like how long does it take to travel to your natal home? I know it doesn't give you like whether you are in the same district or not, like your in-laws place and your natal place, but I was just wondering if you can use that variable somehow. But I think Som has a very good suggestion here.
Yeah. Thank you for that suggestion. And so I think that's the IHDS we can look into. I believe there's a round of the NSS, I think it may have been the 2007-8 that has migration, some data on migration that we can look into.
Yeah, that was,
well.
yeah, that's something someone has just put that in the chat. So.
Oh, perfect. Sorry, I can't see the chat box, but yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that's something that we can use as well. And especially like with the census data, we can try to back out sort of inter-district. I mean, you can, I think, theoretically construct the whole matrix of cross-district rates of migration. And so depending on the district, you can try to allocate the program intensity of, say, the adjacent district and see by how much estimates change. I think that, yeah, those are great ideas. Thank you for that. Okay, great. How am I doing on time? Okay, good. So next I want to turn to some of the mechanisms that may be underlying this these impacts. So now some of my earlier work has shown that there are these first generation impacts of the ICDS for the direct beneficiaries, and these span sort of education, health, labor market income impacts. And so we can think, so we know from the literature, of course, that mothers that are more educated, that are more healthy, and who earn more tend to have children with better outcomes. And so we think that these could be possible mediators in explaining what we are finding. So in the NFHS data, there is data on the mother's year of education, data on the height, as well as so unfortunately there isn't sort of a precise income variable, but there's a household wealth score, which is kind of a composite index that draws on different things, including assets and such in the house. And like was I think described earlier, so there's also potential marriage market channels. So there's this work that examines the intergenerational impacts of the kind of Esther Duflo's classic school construction in Indonesia. So now there's work that looks at the intergenerational impacts of that. And one of the channels highlighted in that work is a marriage market channel where individuals may marry spouses with more education. And so we want to check that as well. Now, the mediation analysis that we're going to do follows this methodology by Gelbach, and I think now has been used in several papers. The Carniero and Imran Rasul and co-authors paper that just came out in the ER this year also uses a similar sort of mediation analysis on an early childhood program in Nigeria. And so the idea is the following. So you can decompose the impacts that are coming from treatment in the following way. So there may be a set of mediators. In this case, we consider 4 possible mediators. You can break that down as what impact the program has on the mediator, and then what impact the mediator has on the outcome. And the sort of 4-step algorithm, or the way the author proposes, is to do the following. So to first estimate the unconditional ITT regression. So that's what we have done, and I've shown you so far. So from there we get the unconditional estimate. Then to basically include the mediators and estimate the conditional ITT regression. So you have the mediators M, and you basically throw them in the regression, and you estimate beta 1 C for the conditional ITT. So then you estimate the impact that the program has on each mediator separately, and so you do this for each mediator in turn. And then you basically take the product of how much the program has an effect on the mediator, how much the mediator has an effect on the outcome of interest, and you divide by the sort of unconditional ITT to get the fraction that's being sort of explained or contributed by okay, so that's the methodology that we borrow and use here. So I want to stress that this is not, strictly speaking, causal mediation, and so this comes with a set of pretty strict assumptions, and so that's why we present this as sort of suggestive. But I think it's still good to get a sense of, okay, why are we seeing the impacts that we see. One of the sort of key assumptions is actually that of independence across the mediators. So in this case, education, health, and wealth. If you want a strictly speaking causal mediation analysis, you would have to assume that there are no interlinks between those variables, and there clearly are between education, health, and wealth. So we present this as suggestive, and I want to caveat that before I show you the the estimates. Okay. So again, I'm going to present the just using the 3 indices that we construct for those 3 families. And again, with the literature, as is common, doing something like this, a lot of it ends up being in the residual, and so that's unexplained. And then there's a portion that's unexplained. And so for the child health index, we can attribute about 20% of that as coming from mother's education, and about 26% of that coming from the wealth score for the household. Mother's height and the father's education represent smaller slices of the pie. For the mortality index, a lot more of it remains as unexplained, but again, mother's education and wealth seem to stand out. And for the parental investments index as well, the mother's education and wealth again stand out. So we think that kind of going through this exercise across the 3 families, these seem to be the mediators which keep showing up as having contributing in a large way to that impact that we had estimated before. So I also want to highlight that the way this is done is that this is the product of, so if you remember, so this is the product of how much the ICDS has on that mediator and how much that mediator has on the outcome. So when we see a large share coming from, say, mother's education, that is a combination of the ICDS having a large first generation impact on the mother's education, but also the fact that mother's education plays a big role in the child's health. And I think so that is consistent with what's found in the literature, and I think, you know, decomposing and keeping that product in mind is helpful as we think about these magnitudes. Okay, great. Okay, so then the last thing I want to do in the 10 minutes that remain is show you a cost benefit analysis. And so there were questions earlier on the internal rate of return of the program. So let's go through that. So the cost to the government is basically known, and that's really the key program cost of the ICDS. And what we then have to do is to value the benefits that we are estimating from the program. So the first generation benefits I've studied in previous work and valued the wage as well as the health impacts that accrue to the individuals who are exposed to the ICDS. In this paper, what we're really interested in are the kind of second generation impacts that we want to monetize. Okay, so then the question is how to monetize it, and you know, we have to make several assumptions here. So we're going to focus on two things: the reductions in the infant mortality and the reductions in stunting, and try to put a dollar value on those two variables. Okay, for the reductions in infant mortality, we use the value of statistical life. So here we turn to the literature, which looks at developing countries in general, and we take the kind of lower bound, more conservative estimate of the VSL calculation from the literature to value the gains that come from stunting.
Saravana,
Yes.
that number seems very high VSL. If you look at the Viscoon paper from just a few years ago, they have benefit transfer to many countries, and they have a VSL of about $270,000 for India. And if you use Alberini and others, they have a paper from the early 2000s that gives you a still lower VSL. So I'm kind of surprised that where you got this 1.1 million figure from. It seems very high.
I see. This is also work from Alberini and co-authors, but I can certainly take a look at the paper you mentioned.
Look at Viscusi and Masterman, 2017, I think, or maybe 2019, 2017, I think.
I see.
Or if you look at other recent benefit transfer literature, you'll find similar values. It should be about a quarter or a fifth of that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think in the paper we show some sensitivity to these assumptions, because there are several assumptions that we need to make in order to monetize these benefits, and so we do give a range, but that's something that we can certainly look at. That's actually important because it's the VCL that there's a VSL that drives a lot of the gain in the IRR and not the stunting portion. So we can certainly take a look at that. And so for the stunting gains as well, we turn to height wage premium from the literature to put some numbers on how much that reduction in stunting can buy you in the labor market. We value the benefits for all children, and also, of course, averaging benefits across mothers and fathers, even though we saw that fathers for fathers, the intergenerational impacts are basically 0. Okay, so the timing is as such. So for the parent who was born at time T0, we have the cost to the government of providing the program upfront. That individual is going to experience first generation direct wage and health benefits over their lifetime. And so comparing that, we get the IRR calculation for the first generation. What we do here is that we are looking at the second generation. So if we have a child born at time T1, we have benefits in the form of the value of statistical life that, again, we have to make an assumption here on where to load the VSL. So we think it's conservative to basically spread that across the child's lifetime rather than load it all at time T1. And then we also have the gains from stunting, which will pay off in the child's working years. So once the child is in the labor market, they'll realize the gains from that reduction in stunting. So these are the two key impacts that we're going to monetize and compare that against the cost to the government of providing the program. Okay, so these are the numbers I mentioned earlier. So if we are only to look at the first generation impacts, the rate of return is about 8.9%. Additionally, including the second generation gains from the reduction in stunting increase that slightly, but only to 9.2%. And the largest gains are from the reductions in mortality, which bring that up to about 12%. Yeah, thank you for the suggestion. We'll certainly show sensitivity to using different assumptions of the VSL there, because that's the key piece of the gain. So we think of this as potentially an underestimate, because we are really focusing only on the health, intergenerational health impacts. There may be other intergenerational education impacts and such, which we don't look at and monetize, and so the IRR might actually be even higher than this. And to place this in the literature, though, it's somewhat difficult because there aren't as many kind of comparisons with other early childhood programs, just because this work is sort of new and hard to compare with those other studies. But going back to that paper I mentioned on the intergenerational impacts of the primary school construction in Indonesia, there the authors find extremely huge gains by valuing the second generation impact. So they find that the IRR goes up from about 8%, which I think replicates what Esther Duflo found, all the way up to about 24%. So huge gains in IRR. In that study. We don't find such dramatic changes in the IRR, and of course that's because we are focusing on the health gains, but also these are somewhat different to begin with. This is an early childhood program versus the kind of primary school construction in Indonesia, right? Okay, so then to conclude, today I've presented intergenerational impacts of an early childhood program in a developing country setting, in fact, the largest of its kind in the world. I've shown positive intergenerational health impacts from mothers' program exposure, particularly in the form of lower mortality, stunting, underweight, and low birth weight. Overall, we do not find significant intergenerational impacts from fathers' program exposure. We find that mothers who were exposed to the program invested more in their children, and the mediation analysis reveals that maternal education and wealth are important mechanisms driving these impacts that we estimate. These findings have important policy implications, and accounting for the intergenerational impacts increases the internal rate of return to the program by about 35%. Okay. So I'll stop here then, and then I think we have time for questions.
Thanks, Saravana. So I just want to put in there's another comment on the chat. I think this is about accounting for the possible benefits is that of the program is the program cost on mothers, especially mothers' time use and unemployment and employment, sorry, which might be significant as one of the aims of the ICDS is to provide Anganwadi centers and boost female workforce participation. So the way I'm interpreting this is that because you are providing some sort of employment, you might be also undervaluing the program.
Right, right. That's a good suggestion. So what we have done is really looking at the cost benefit from the government perspective. So looking at what does it cost to provide the program versus the benefits that would accrue to the individuals. Now, of course, there's a lot of reallocation that is taking place on the parent side. So I think, as you mentioned, there's the time aspect and the time spent on childcare. There's also the parental investments that we looked at in this study itself, providing children with vaccines and nutritious diet and such. So that we don't value because the calculation we've done is from the sort of government provision standpoint, but that's another kind of calculation that would be interesting to do. So thank you for that suggestion.
Okay. So we have some time. If there are other questions, feel free to ask them now, and I'll just wait for a minute for anyone to ask questions if they want to. There's another question. How well does the density of program centers correlate with the actual program exposure, given the high rates of vacancies in the ICDS centers? Density of program centers with program exposure.
I see. So is the idea that we can check the program intensity as measured by but as on children in these areas with the actual utilization of the program? Is that the idea?
I think so. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. No, that's something.
Yeah. That's the idea.
Yeah, I think that's something that we can do with, again, the NFHS doesn't have a lot of information on take up, but that's something that we can certainly look at. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So any further questions? Okay, so I guess we are all talked out. So thanks. I want to thank our speaker for a very interesting talk and our audience for all the questions and comments. And that I'll stop the recording.